Thank you so much, Natalia, and thank you so much the conference organizers for basically putting together such an incredible conference and bringing everyone together. I know it's been a while since we were able to kind of be in the same room and talk about all things Angular, be part of the House of Angular right there. Anyone has another type of house that we're going to host here? I'm so incredibly excited to join you today, and I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you for all the awesome contributions that you're making to Angular on a day-to-day basis by really working together and being part of this incredible community. And today we're going to talk about the Angular developer experience. And I want to start with a story. I want to start with a story about the American Air Force back in the 1950s. The pilots were having trouble controlling their aircraft, and incidents were on the rise, unfortunately. And they couldn't understand why, what was happening. They looked at the skills of the pilots, they looked at the technology, they looked at everything, and nothing really seemed to make sense or to come up as an obvious root cause until they looked at the cockpit. And what was interesting about it was that it was created 20 years before, and it was created for the average person. But who here, who is actually the average person? What they discovered is that in trying to fit the average person, they actually didn't fit anyone. And once they made that discovery, they redesigned the controls of the cockpit in a way that they were adjustable so they can meet the unique needs of their pilots. And that really laid the foundation to expand the Air Force to women as well, and build a more diverse and inclusive workforce. And you might be wondering, how does that actually apply to Angular? And we all know that Angular is a very opinionated framework, and we know that that's one of our strengths. But we also know that each of us and each of you, like the pilots in the Air Force, has a different set of problems that you need to solve, and you have a different set of tools that you like or you're required to use by your companies, by the environments that you work in. And you might also have a different set of customer needs that you need to address and work towards. So just as the Air Force made those flexible controls within the cockpit, in the same way, we're building Angular so that it's a framework that has those controls for you. It has a set of knobs so that you can use the framework in a way that fits your needs perfectly. So in other words, we want to meet developers where they are. And what that means for us a lot of times is also listening to all of you. And one way in which we listen to all of you is through this annual Angular survey that we're sending out. And to our knowledge, this is actually one of the largest front-end surveys out there, with more than 25,000 people that have sent their input into it. And we recognize that there's a couple areas or a few areas that you're absolutely incredibly happy with. Things like how productive Angular makes you. You love keeping up to date with Angular releases, and you love using the UI components and the tooling. But we also recognize that there's a few areas that have some space for improvement, like debugging and profiling. How many of you here have experienced moments when you just had to take a walk, you just had to go out and close your computer and be done, right? It can be frustrating. And sometimes it's because of our own code, right? But sometimes it can be because the framework and the tools that we're using aren't actually helping us to be productive in doing that debugging and profiling. So over the past few months, we've worked, the Angular team has worked together with the Chrome DevTools team to improve the debugging and profiling experience directly in Chrome within the DevTools experience. And I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but I did want to share that part of the DevTools team is actually working out of Munich. So for those of you that are from Germany and maybe come from Munich, know that the Chrome DevTools is actually built in Munich, in Germany, which is very awesome. But yeah, back to profiling and debugging. Basically, our teams work together to enable developers to debug and profile web apps from an authoring perspective. And we focused primarily on making sure that you are seeing the files and the project structure that you've created, that you have access to the information that is familiar, code that you've authored, and that is relevant to what you are actually looking for. So when debugging applications using Chrome DevTools, authors generally want to see only their code, not that of the framework underneath or maybe some dependency that's listed in node modules, right? You want to be able to debug your code with the assumption that the framework and the dependencies that you've imported into your applications are actually doing the right thing. So you can see here that as I'm searching for my app component, the app component is the last item in that list, as opposed to all of the other ones that are prioritized there that are actually framework-related files. So that's not a great experience for really being in the flow and being able to have this awesome debugging experience. What we really want is to have this experience where app component and the files that we've authored are actually returned first. And to enable this, the DevTools team has introduced an extension to SourceMap that's called x_Google_ignore list. And this extension is used to identify third-party sources, such as the framework code or bundler-generated code. And when a framework, in this case Angular, uses this extension, authors now automatically avoid this third-party code, and they can dive directly into their application code. And this is available as part of Chrome DevTools for every framework out there to implement. So we've worked directly with DevTools to have this implemented after identifying this as a challenge. But now any other framework can make use of this flag. And in practice, Chrome DevTools can automatically hide code identified as third-party in stack traces as well. So here we have the example of a 404 error, and I'm expanding that error, and I can see a long list of files being returned here in calls, of which only one is the code that I authored. Everything else is zone-related, and that's not really helpful because I don't want to debug Zone.js. What I really want to debug is my own application's code. As a result of this collaboration, we were able to reduce the list of files that's being returned to you and also make it a lot more relevant to your application. So you can see here that we have app component and main TS as the list of files that are relevant as we're debugging. And we're also, as we're stepping through our code, we're not gonna step through Zone.js anymore. We're gonna step through our own authored code. And we worked on linking stack traces for asynchronous operations. So now you're gonna have the context within the debug panel for your asynchronous operations as well, so that you know where those calls originated from. I think that's really awesome, isn't it? Yeah? Very cool. Another area or another type of feedback that we've heard through these surveys and in general is something like messages and error messages aren't very clear. And I'm sure that this error message sounds very familiar to all of you, right? Yeah? The Angular team actually spent a significant amount of time over the past year parsing and grokking different types of error messages and common error messages. And the way we did that was literally going to Google search and Stack Overflow and understanding what are the common errors that people are running into, understanding how we can better surface and explain those errors and the causes for those errors. So what we did was we added numbers for those error messages, and we also created error reference set of guides, very detailed ones, where we explain what is the root cause, how might you fix that. And we also partnered with fireship.io to create videos to explain why this error happens and how can we get past that for those visual learners here in the audience. And we've linked those pages directly within the errors that you're getting. So I hope that's useful. Errors were also one of the top areas for improvement. And please, as you're receiving or as we're putting out the new Angular survey for this year, do let us know if there's any other areas that have room for improvement. As you can see, they serve as input for the product decisions that we're making and the things that we're prioritizing as part of our roadmap. So going back to it, I know there's another area right there. It's very obvious, and that's testing. And in Angular v12, we added support for 3 popular end-to-end testing frameworks like Cypress, Nightwatch.io, and WebDriver.io. And Playwright also has a migration guide for how to use it with Angular. And currently, when you create a new project or new projects, when you run NG end-to-end, you will be given these 3 different options to set up your end-to-end testing. And these tools support custom builders and schematics, which automatically update your project's configuration to integrate with Angular applications. And in v14, after going through a request for comments process and really taking the time to understand with our community what would be good next steps for Protractor, we decided to deprecate it. This means that this means that starting with v16, we will no longer release new versions of Protractor, but we also recognize that some teams might not be in a position to migrate immediately off of Protractor. So we've worked with the team at Hero Devs to make sure that they are able to offer long-term support for Protractor. So for those of you in the audience that are happy that Protractor is no longer here, you have these other 3 options or even more. Really what we're building here is that extensibility that I was talking about earlier. So rather than us maintaining and being in the business of building end-to-end testing frameworks, we want to make sure that we focus on building a platform that offers those integration points with the tools that you want to use. And we also recognize that end-to-end testing is not the only part of the story. We've heard loud and clear that feedback around unit testing. And as part of the work that we're doing over the next year, we want to prioritize investigating what are some of the challenges with unit testing and how we can best support you in your journey of really writing good code. We also hear that you're excited about using native tools, and in particular, you're excited about faster build times and faster for both your dev environment and your production environment. And currently, the way the Angular build pipeline is set up for production, for example, is in the first stage, we're using Webpack to bundle your code. Then there's another stage that uses ESBuild to apply some optimizations like function inlining for your code. And then we further continue these optimizations by using Cursor to further compress your code. So those are 3 different stages, which in the current context, it is performing well, but we recognize that with the recent evolution of tools like ESBuild and VIT and others, we know that we can do better. So V14 introduces an experimental ESBuild-based build system for NGBuild, which compiles to pure ESM output. And in V15, we're also adding support for watch mode in development environment. And I have two projects here. Both of them are just like basic Hello World application generated with NGNew. On the left-hand side, I've ran NGBuild using the pipeline that's currently available in the stable version. And you can see that the build time there was about 7.1 seconds. And this is a cold build. On the right-hand side, I've configured the same project to use ESBuild. And you can see that the build time was 3.6 seconds. And that actually aligns to our findings that by using only ESBuild in our build pipeline, we get 57% faster cold builds. And so you can enable this today in your projects by editing the angular.json file and replace build browser with build browser ESBuild. This feature is experimental, and we plan to have it in developer preview and then in stable version over the next few versions. But in the meantime, please give it a try and give us feedback so that we can build the best build process for you out there. All right, shifting gears a bit. Another strong theme that we talk about within the Angular team and within our community in general is about reducing the learning curve for Angular. And one way to do that is by reducing the number of concepts that developers need to learn early in their journey. And as you can see in this Hello World application, or just very simple Hello World application, in order to get started with the simplest Hello World, developers need to write a component, declare it in ng module, and bootstrap this application. And someone coming in, I know that a lot of you here are experienced Angular developers, and you know what ng module is, and that's something that you're no longer thinking about. But as someone that's new, let's say, in their web dev journey or new to Angular, there's a couple of things that they might be confused about. And one potential area of confusion is generally, what's the difference between ng modules and JavaScript modules? How many of you have had this question when you just started working with Angular? Yeah, I see probably 30% of the room. It's okay to keep your hand up. Yeah, I think that's a fair question because they're both types of modules that have like different types of functionality. And moreover, the ng modules API can be complex and it serves different responsibilities in some sense. So it includes compiler configuration, which basically tells the compiler how to find the components associated with the selectors of certain components and directives. And this is configured using the declarations array. We also have here runtime configuration for our injector using the providers array. And this API helps us group and compose ng modules together so that, and we make them available through the imports and exports property. Not only that, ng modules are a great way to organize our applications and keep code that's related to specific functionality or features separate from other code. So over time, a lot of excellent patterns have emerged around how we architect our Angular applications and how we use ng modules in a way that it's a shared understanding. So here you can see that we have different types of NG modules, like domain-related one, where we organize NG modules around a feature or a business domain or a user experience, or we organize it around services or widgets. So there's a lot of ways in which we can use NG modules. That's a lot of information that someone needs to parse as they just create a new Angular application. So this is where we enter standalone. And getting started with Angular using standalone components is as simple as writing your component and then directly bootstrapping the application using that component. And you can see that this requires a lot less concepts to parse as you're just getting started. And this is side by side, the first getting started application and the second one. Even visually, there's a lot less that you have to process. And one of the side effects of standalone components is that components are now the smallest unit of reuse. And you can lazy load, which you can lazy load directly using your component in your router. And I don't know if you've seen this from Minko, but as we started rewriting some of our router APIs for standalone, it also enabled us to shave off 11% of the router bundle. So as you're using these new standalone APIs, you're not only making it easier for folks that are just joining your team or just starting to learn Angular, but also you're reducing your bundle size. But I want to spend some time to really stress that the goal is not to remove NG modules, but rather to enable a getting started experience that doesn't require folks to learn about NG modules immediately. So with that in mind, we made sure that standalone components, directives, and pipes work really well with NG module-based applications, and that you can easily import NG modules directly into your standalone applications. We want to make sure that this is interoperable and you can use both types of APIs. And ultimately, as we build Angular, one of our goals is to help you put the user at the center, while also reducing the friction for building great experiences for the web. And optimizing for quality, the quality of the user experience is really key for the long-term success of any web application. And Web Vitals are really a way for us to put a number on the user experience. The metrics that make up core Web Vitals definitely evolve over time. I think we've already seen a few iterations of these metrics, and we know that they might change over the next years as well. But the current ones, they focus on three aspects of the user experience. They focus on loading time, on interactivity, and visual stability. And the first one that we're looking at for core Web Vitals is LCP, the largest contentful paint. And this really is a metric that tells us how much time it takes for the user to figure out if this page is relevant for them or not. So for the most meaningful element on the page to actually load and them to make a decision. First input delay, FID, it measures interactivity. And in order to provide a good user experience, pages should have an FID of 100 milliseconds or less. And cumulative layout shift, or CLS, it measures visual stability. I think we're all familiar, especially on mobile devices, when we open a page and then suddenly the context that we've just created has shifted, and we're no longer sure where everything is, and it's very frustrating. And that's a bad user experience. We want to make sure that we can measure these metrics, and that as we're building applications, we're building them with them in mind. And over the past few years, we've worked with the Aurora team in Chrome to investigate how we can improve core Web Vitals for Angular applications. One of our recent focuses has been largest contentful paint, so that's LCP. And part of the reason why we're focusing on this is because we recognize that there's plenty of room for improvement for Angular applications out there. I don't know if you're familiar with HTTP Archive. It is basically a database with a lot of data points that are processed by the Chrome team, where they parse traffic over several months every time, and they publish a guide where they talk about performance, about the evolution of JavaScript in websites. I highly recommend that you check it out. But here you can see what is the average LCP for Angular applications over different months. And diving deeper into this data, we can see that 71% of pages had an LCP element that was an image, regardless of what type of HTML node was used. And given this data, we wondered, what kind of best practices can we build in by default within the framework so that we offer an image component that is able to have much better LCP generally for websites. So a couple of things that we looked at are intelligent lazy loading for images that are not part of the priority or are not the LCP. Prioritization of critical images that are the largest contentful paint element. And we also wanted to build in optimization for different image CDNs that you might be using out there. You can use the newly created image directive in your applications today by updating your image element to use NGSRC. And this will include all of those best practices that you don't have to worry about, and it will have impact on your application's core web vitals. It's available as of version 14.2 in developer preview, and we plan to have it released as stable in version 15. We also want to enable you to build great experiences on the web for everyone. And we want to enable best practices for accessibility by default. So there's a couple changes and a couple things that have been shipped either as part of version 14 or will be released as part of v15. One of which is the router page title. So previously you had to maybe pass in data and then update the page title. Today the router will support setting up a title, and as the user navigates to a different page, this title will be updated. We also, you can also use template page title strategy if you have more custom configuration that you need to set up. We have another community contribution to add support for area current in router link active, and this is so that we inform the assistive technology that the user uses that an element is active. So for folks that have, for sighted users, we usually add that as a styling element. And now by adding this area current in router link active, we make it available for assistive technology users as well. And there's other awesome community contributions to Angular ESLint as well in the form of rules that you can validate. Another way that we bake in default accessibility best practices is through our Angular material components and CDK. And one of the areas of focus for the components team has been to migrate to material design components, which is now reaching stable version in v15. And this enables us to be more consistent with the material spec, and it makes it easier to transition to material 3. I know a lot of you are excited about that. Looking ahead, there's a couple explorations that are top of mind for the team. We're continuously looking at how we can improve our documentation, and particularly our initial learning journey, usability, and consistency of presentations of topics. We're also exploring improvements that we can make to hydration. These are really early days. We've just started looking at this. But we're excited about what's possible, and we're definitely looking for your input in that direction as well. And finally, we're exploring reactivity and asking questions like, can we have per component change detection as opposed to top-down, check the entire world change detection? Or can we have zoneless Angular or computed properties? But most importantly, we're exploring all of these topics with the priority of evolving Angular while also maintaining platform stability and bringing everyone along. And really maintaining the properties of an opinionated framework that also includes the controls and the knobs so that developers can use this framework in a way that exactly fits their needs. I'm excited for how you're going to use Angular and how that's going to be helpful in you building great experience for your users. Thank you so much. Danke.